How disappointing have the Chargers been in 2022? We're getting into our 4-week progress report on today's Locked On Chargers podcast.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer. We've been covering the Chargers together now for 6 seasons, but our 5th season as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen, and to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe to the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and also follow the show for free on all platforms wherever you get your podcast from. Well, David, today is the closest we're going to get to a quarter-long kind of progress report on the Chargers, who are 2-2 through 4 weeks, and we're talking about, how and where kind of they've been disappointing so far this season, if they have been, and also just where they stack up in the AFC West as of now, right? Because the division is still very open to this point, but it is Chargers mailbag day, so we'll also be getting into our rookie progress report, talking about the 2022 rookies this year and how some of them have fared, and also getting into how the Chargers run defense has given up so many explosive plays lately. Talk about a couple of guys we need to see better from, like Matt Feiler and Josh Palmer. But today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, David, well, it's time to get out our progress reports now that the Chargers have gone for a month, right? 4 games into their season, and they're 2-2. With the expectations that we had from them going into this season, is there any way to look at this start as not a disappointment?
No, I don't think so. And the reason why is, I think you look at the first 2 games and you kind of understood that the division matchups were always going to be tough. You knew there was going to be some, physical games between the Raiders and the Chiefs. And, now we didn't have any real idea how good the Chiefs were before the season. We felt like they would, feel the absence of Tyreek Hill, but that does not seem to be the case as they're, 3-1 and leading in the division. But as far as, the rest of, the games here, I think the biggest anomaly here out of the first 4 games, Daniel, is the Jacksonville Jaguars game. I mean, I think that's the biggest surprise. I think that was a big wake-up call for the Chargers, Chargers fans, and kind of where the Chargers feel like their season was going to go. That was a big turning point, I think, through the first 4 games.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're just looking at the individual units, right, the offense so far, 7th in yards per game, but to only 12th in points per game, which I think you'd say is a little under, but obviously you're missing Keenan Allen, right? So you're not quite where you'd want to be there. They're 11th in DVOA from Football Outsiders offensively. Defensively, 27 points per game allowed. A lot of that skewed by a 38-point performance that the Jacksonville Jaguars put up against them. But at the same time, I mean, there hasn't been a single game where, they've given up 10 points or less or anything like that. We haven't seen a really good defensive performance so far, and they've played some pretty good teams, especially earlier in the season. At the same time, we can see they're flawed, like we did in the last game against the Houston Texans. But I mean, 2-2, David, gets you to about 500, right? That's a 9-8 season, an 8-9 season. So there's no other way around it but to look at it as a disappointing start. I mean, I think there are a lot of positives, right? Even with the injury, Justin Herbert still looks incredible, right? Still looks like he'll be able to win them plenty of games if they can kind of show up around him, for sure, right? And you also, I think the other disappointing thing, though, David, is Joey Bosa on injured reserve. Rashawn Slater missing the entire season, probably, right? Brandon Staley was given some life, maybe not on that one. But you also have missed, Keenan Allen for 3.5 of your games so far. So, even though it has been disappointing, I think probably the most disappointing part are the injuries that they've suffered. The nice thing is they're getting some of those guys back. Joey Bosa eventually, Keenan Allen hopefully soon, Donald Parham soon. So there is reason, I think, to think that I can turn around a little bit, and maybe by the next, 4 games, by the time those go by, that we're having a different conversation.
I agree. And I think one of the guys that you didn't touch on there that was very, very important that made his return is Corey Linsley.
Yeah.
Corey Linsley's return is massive. I mean, especially for the protections for Justin Herbert. I've talked about this many times. It really takes a lot off his plate, and he's really the general there. He's such a cerebral player. He understands what's going on. He gives help when it's needed. He just has that feel, that veteran presence that you just can't, put a number on it. It's invaluable. Yeah. He is very, very crucial to how this offense and how this offensive line operates, and they go kind of as he goes. So when he's in there, he makes a tremendous difference. But one of the things we got to point out here, as far as what the Chargers have not done very well, it has a lot to do with the second half of games. I was reading Daniel Popper's article, and you said the Chargers defense has allowed 68 second half points through the first 4 games. That's second most in the NFL. That is horrible. And of course, also the offense, meanwhile, scored 31 second half points, which ranks 24th in the league. So the second half of ball games for the Chargers through the first 4 games have been a huge problem and a big reason why they are sitting here at 500.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Play calling is going to be a big one that many people are going to point out. I honestly didn't think Joe Lombardi had that bad of a play calling game
I
last
agree.
week. Second half, I mean, there was definitely some questionable things. Personnel-wise, having Sony Michel in there is something we talked about already. But I think as far as this team and finishing games, I think hopefully they took a good step in that direction. They got 2 defensive stops at the end of that last game. Got the long drive, a 6-minute drive to go get a touchdown and kind of put the game out of reach. But we still haven't seen them put together a complete game at this point. That was probably the closest thing that we saw last week, right? I mean, even maybe the Raiders game, those 2 wins that they have so far, but they haven't had a convincing win where you really just coasted to the finish, right? And it doesn't happen often at the NFL level. But I do like what you're saying about Corey Linsley, though, because, I mean, if you just look at the, 6 quarters he wasn't available. The second half he wasn't there for the Kansas City Chiefs, where they totally imploded offensively. And then you look at the entire Jacksonville Jaguars game, right? Those are the 6 quarters they spent without Corey Linsley. Go look at how the offense fared in those 6 quarters.
Didn't look good.
No, it was terrible. So he is a huge part of it. Nice to see him come out of this week with no setbacks. You just have to hope they can keep that knee tendonitis or whatever it is under control as much as they can throughout the rest of the season and getting some reinforcements back. But the AFC West is wide open. The Chargers are second in the AFC West right now, really tied with the Broncos at 2-2, but they have a better divisional record because now the Broncos are 0-1 after losing to the 0-3 Raiders. The Raiders are now 1-3, cleaning up last place in the AFC West and now have a game against the Chiefs upcoming this week. So that could get worse even in a hurry. David, do you think the Chargers have kind of shown that they are the second best team in the division so far?
Yeah, I definitely think that would be the case here. You're just looking at the rest of the division there. You look at the Raiders at the bottom. Obviously, they have their flaws, and they are plentiful. And there's a lot of questions there about their play calling and how they're using their stars out there. And then the Broncos, I think that was a team that everybody thought was a kind of a dark horse candidate. A team that they think was really going to do a lot of good things this year. And their defense is definitely as advertised. We know that they're very good. They have been. But the offense and Russell Wilson, the guy who was supposed to be the savior, the guy who was supposed to kind of change the way that they look at offensive football out there in Denver, has not really played out exactly how they expected, especially after handing him a gigantic, massive contract extension. So far, I think you look at the Chargers offensively, there's a lot of things that you like, still some things that make you scratch your head, like the running game and the play calling on occasion. But I think you look at the defensive side, there are things to be encouraged about. I think the pass defense is very competitive. You still have great contributions from Derwin James, Asante Samuel Jr., and I think you've seen some good things in the run defense. It's just limiting those explosive runs. That's been one of the big Achilles heels for the Chargers, but I think they can definitely compete in the AFC West.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the thing with the Broncos too is like obviously they've been super underwhelming, even sitting at 2-2. Right, feels like it should almost be even worse than that. But they're dealing with big injuries of their own, right? I mean, they just put Randy Gregory on injured reserve. He's going to be out for the game against the Chargers coming up in 2 weeks. And Javonte Williams, their star running back, is out for the season, while Melvin Gordon is fumbling all of his opportunities away over in Denver.
Literally.
So I do think the Chargers, I mean, it's hard to have faith that they're much better than really any team in the NFL right now, just with how up and down they've been, to give any kind of definitive answer. But I think the Chiefs showed last week against the Buccaneers, going up against that defense and doing what they did to it, that they're a for real team. And even with that loss to the Colts, which seems like an outlier at this point, even the Chargers game, they maybe should have lost, or the Chargers at least should have won that game. Maybe you feel a little bit differently about it. But I think at least so far, the Chargers, with the obvious questions that we know so much about, it's, I think, fair to put them at second in the division right now.
Yeah.
The division is wide open. You're still a month into the season and you're one game out of first place in the AFC West. A lot of football in front of you. But you did lose the head-to-head matchup, so that hurts. You can obviously get it back later on in the season, and you'll have that chance to kind of get that one back and retake, the AFC West ground. But the Chargers have a lot of hard games coming up as well, right? So this is a really important part of their schedule, including this week coming up against the Cleveland Browns, where they have to kind of show us, right? It's still in show us mode. It's not on paper mode anymore, right? It's like, hey, show us you can be that kind of complete team. And I think this team, as far as their progress report, I'm going to give them a C through 4 games so far.
I mean, yeah, I think that's the right grade. I don't know if you can give them anything higher than that.
No, I don't think so. But the Chargers have had a couple of super impressive rookies, and we are getting into our Chargers mailbag today because it is Wednesday. It's something that we very much like to do and get into. So I do want to get into, some guys that have been performing so far, and yet still a couple more guys, David, where they haven't even really been able to get on the field. But first, I need to tell you guys something that's really important and something that everyone uses, and that is LinkedIn, and specifically LinkedIn Jobs. Because as you gear up for fall, you need the right people on your team to help make your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. Create a job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job with the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills experience so you can find the right candidates and you guys can prioritize who you want to interview and who you want to eventually hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs as the number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, David. Well, we'd love getting into, your guys' questions, and thank you guys for everyone who reached out to us at Locked On LAC on Twitter or wherever, even calling into the Locked On Chargers voicemail line at 323-524-7924. And we had a question that goes really well along with the questions we were talking about in the first segment, David. And this one here is from Peyton on Twitter. But thank you guys again for making us your first listen. If you guys need something else to check out, make sure to check out the NFL key predictions every Friday on Locked On NFL. Locked On's local experts give you the inside scoop on the 5 biggest games of the NFL weekend, including Sunday and Monday Night Football, plus betting advice from the field's leading experts, BetOnline. Follow the NFL keys and predictions show every Friday on Locked On NFL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast from. David, this one kind of goes along with what we were talking about in progress reports, and it's been a really mixed bag with the rookies so far. So this is what Peyton has for us on Twitter. Said, with no second round pick, the Chargers probably should have done better in the next couple of rounds, and it really sucks to see that their 3rd, 4th, and 5th round picks have all been inactive on game day. He did talk about how, obviously Jamaree Salyer and Zion Johnson have been fantastic so far. But, David, it's hard to really give a progress report on the rest of those guys because you have JT Woods, who's played 0 defensive snaps.
Games.
Yep. You have Tito Abonia, who's played 56 defensive snaps. I mean, he's probably the crown jewel of this group, at least so far. Yeah. And Isaiah Spiller, who's yet to even be active on a game day, right? So this is another one of those things. I mean, I think for the other guys, right, 6th round, 7th round picks, guys like Jasir Taylor, Xander Horvath. I mean, Xander Horvath has been a nice surprise, but he's right, David, from the fact that when you're looking at 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks, maybe this season looks a little differently right now if you would hit on guys like that, if you would pick guys who can contribute this year, because that is how good teams stay good. And a lot of good teams get contributions out of their 3rd, 4th, and 5th round picks. And as of right now, we have just really no idea what to even think of these guys because they can't even really get on the field.
Yeah, and it's definitely a little upsetting for guys like JT Woods, who have not been able to get on the football field, and guys like Isaiah Spiller, who I'm sure are doing everything they can in practice to be able to show the coaches that, they deserve some playing time. But, unfortunately, that's just not how everything is set up. But for JT Woods, I feel like we know what he brings to the table. He's got some ball skills. But he just needs to get a little bit thicker. He needs to get a little bit bigger, and he needs to make an impact in the tackling part of his game. That's been the biggest, most inconsistent part. And for Isaiah Spiller, I think it's really boils down to the application on special teams. They really want that 3rd running back to be able to be a factor in the special teams game, and until he's able to do that, I don't know if he's going to be able to get on the football field, even with the futility that we've seen from the running game through the first 4 games. And I think that's really what makes it so frustrating in the case of Isaiah Spiller.
The thing about the Isaiah Spiller and special teams part of it is like Sony Michel's not playing on special teams. So
At
I don't really see that argument. Like, I mean, Josh Kelly definitely does. You're not losing anything. But does that mean it's between Josh Kelly and Isaiah Spiller? Because that wouldn't make any sense to me. I mean, I just think the thing about JT Woods is obviously there's parts of his game you'd love to see on the field, especially the takeaway ability. The guy that played college football in interceptions last year. We know he has ball skills. We've seen him, in the preseason getting interceptions, end up getting called back and things like that. At the same time, though, he also kind of spotlights one of your biggest problems, which is tackling in the secondary. And we'll talk about the run defense coming up after this, but the secondary hasn't been tackling well. JT Woods definitely isn't going to help that at this point. So I do think as far as a progress report on these guys, I mean, I think you have to be thrilled that you hit on 2 offensive linemen potentially in this draft, right?
Huge.
Zion Johnson has looked really good so far. I mean, I'm pretty confident saying, hey, that dude's going to be okay. Even with his rookie kind of learning curve that he's had to go up against, you look like you found a starting right guard for the foreseeable future. And Jamaree Salyer looks like not only can he be, potentially your starting guard as soon as next year if Matt Feiler can't pick things up, and we'll talk about that after this, but also you look like you have a guy who has the flexibility to be tackle sometimes if you need him to play guard if you need him to. And you got that dude in the 6th round, and he just put together kind of a legendary rookie debut in this last game against the Houston Texans. So you feel really good about that, but it also still kind of shines a light on the issue that Tom Telesco's had, especially when you don't have a 2nd-round pick. I mean, really, that's Khalil Mack, and your 2nd-round pick's doing pretty darn good.
Yeah.
But you still need to get, contributing players. Other teams are finding contributing players in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round. We have to see how these guys develop, right? They're not all on the same, timeline. But when you have a team like this that's competing, it's like, hey, those guys would probably be helping some of the issues you're having right now. And I think the weird thing to me about this group, Tito, I think probably should have been active in the last game. He's been one of their better run defenders so far. He is a huge presence on the inside. Be interesting to see if he can get back in the lineup this week, or maybe they bring up someone like Braden Fehoko, which we'll talk about at the end of the show. But one guy, David, that was brought up that multiple people really brought up was Josh Palmer. We have one question here from Bolts fam in Japan. We have not seen Josh Palmer as much as we expected. What's the problem? So, David, I think we all kind of hyped up, Josh Palmer going into the season. He looked really good in the preseason, especially that last game. And I'd say, the results so far have been so-so, especially with Keenan Allen out. It's starting to feel like he's missing an opportunity here.
He's definitely missing an opportunity because right now he is one of the main wide receivers that are on the field with Mike Williams. I mean, he's going to be the guy opposite of him because Keenan Allen is out. I mean, the targets, I mean, they've been there. After the first game, he's got 8 targets. He's got 9 targets. Now, in the last game, he only got targeted once. So that's definitely.
And he had to leave the game for a little bit too.
Right.
He got hurt and had to come back.
Right. He had the foot injury that he was dealing with. He did get back in the football game, which was good. But yeah, I mean, right now, this is the big opportunity for him because Keenan Allen is on the verge of coming back. I mean, it seems like he was close to come back in this game against the Houston Texans, but he just wasn't quite ready to go. But it seems like he could be coming back here against the Cleveland Browns. So if he does, that's inevitably going to eat into Josh Palmer's snaps and his playing time. So right now, I don't think you can say anything other than this has been a missed opportunity for Josh Palmer, unfortunately for the Chargers.
And I mean, it's easy to forget too. He just had 6 catches for 99 yards against the Jaguars and almost put up 100 receiving yards, right? And that's a very good game for any Chargers player, right? I think it's the 3rd best performance behind Mike Williams, 200-yard game so far this season. But it's just the inconsistency, right? It's 1 catch for 25 yards last game, with the first game without Keenan Allen against the Chiefs, 4 for 30 when you were hoping for a big game from him. And Mike Williams did end up having a big game in both of these last 2 smaller games, right, where he's kind of hogging a lot of those targets. On that big crossing route to Mike Williams where he gained 50 yards in this last game, Josh Palmer was the decoy getting sent down the field. And that is a little bit promising, though, to see them getting kind of those crossing routes, those clear out routes working, right? Because this is 2 weeks in a row now. Josh Palmer had a 40-plus yarder 2 weeks ago against the Jags. Last week, you had Mike Williams on that similar play coming across the middle and picking up 50 yards on a catch and run. Let's see more like that. The Chargers don't have
good. They can
do
enough. That. Like, it seems like every time they do that with Mike Williams, it produces a positive result. They got to do that more often.
Or either one of those guys. Because, I mean, I think you saw with Josh Palmer, if you can get him with a running start in the open field, like he's going to be able to eat up some yards, which he did.
Yeah.
You need certain things to go right? You have to have linebackers biting down on the play action. You have to have guys committing to Josh Palmer on that deep route and going with him instead of staying in the middle of the field. There's a lot of things that have to happen, but when they've dialed it up, it's worked. You want to see more creative plays like that where you're getting guys in open space, getting your receivers in the best possible scenario. But Josh Palmer hasn't been the only guy that's disappointed a little bit so far in 2022 by any means. We talked about Nazir Adderall yesterday, but one of the guys that I am starting to get a little concerned about, David, is Matt Feiler, who, was a guy we were kind of just writing in as, one of the locks to be solid for the Chargers on their offensive line. So far, it's been a struggle for him, and it's been a struggle for the Chargers defense to stop anybody on the ground. And now, especially with the big plays, you have the Cleveland Browns coming up and Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb is probably going to lead the league in rushing this year. So we're going to talk about those issues and we continue our Chargers mailbag here. But first, I also need to tell you guys about the official betting sponsor of the Locked On Chargers podcast. And I'm talking about BetOnline.net. BetOnline is your number one source for football betting info this season, guys. So make sure you're not missing out on the action and all of the latest info so you can be making the most informed bets possible. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. You also have basketball coming up here, and you also have football all day, every Sunday that you guys should be getting in on. So make sure you head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more today at BetOnline, where the game starts. The Chargers offensive line so far this season has taken some major blows. Obviously, losing Corey Linsley, like we talked about, their all-pro center for, 6 quarters that they did and having the offense look terrible. And you lost Rashawn Slater to a biceps injury that's probably going to keep him out for the entirety of the season. But you have had some bright spots, really, David, too, I think, on this offensive line, like Trey Pipkins has advertised through 4 weeks. Not something I necessarily thought we'd be saying right now. And you also have someone like Jamaree Salyer, who just shows up as a 6th-round pick, playing guard in the preseason, and starts at left tackle and gives up 0 pressures and 41 pass blocking attempts. Then you have Matt Feiler, David, and there was a lot of questions we had about this Chargers offensive line. We questioned their depth. We questioned going into it with Storm Norton as their swing tackle. We questioned having Trey Pipkins just be the guy without really any competition. That wasn't Storm Norton.
Yeah.
The one thing we didn't question was Matt Feiler. And maybe we should have. I mean, he's getting up there. He's not super old or anything. He's not 35 years old or anything. You would think, okay, hey, this guy has to decline. But we have seen a major decline in Matt Feiler so far this season, David. And we have a question that was brought up about there. Alicia on Twitter says, it's officially time to be worried about Feiler. What seems like a lack of effort on that screenplay was concerning. Hopefully he rediscovers his 2021 form soon. Yeah, I think it is a little bit, David, time to worry. I mean, especially now because before, at least, maybe there was Jamaree Salyer in your back pocket to put in there for him. He's playing left tackle now. So I think it is. I mean, now it's 4 games. I get a little bit more concerned every week.
Yeah, I mean, the more bad performances that get stacked on top of each other, the worse that you feel about it, because right now there's not really anybody else in reserve that you can put in to fill in for Matt Feiler. So Matt Feiler has to play better. And, the stats don't look good. I mean, last year in 21, he gave up 5 sacks and 737 pass blocking snaps, only allowed 7 hits and only 25 pressures allowed the entire season. Through 4 games, 15 pressures already, 1 sack, 1 hit, and 1 penalty. And his grades are terrible. 32.8 pass block grade if you look at PFF, and a 46.3 run block grade. One of the things we didn't even think to even worry about was Matt Feiler in the running game. This guy was a road grader. He was running people over. He was doing business with Rashawn Slater. And this year, it's been a completely different story. I mean, it does look like he's stiff at some times. It doesn't seem like he's exploding out of his stances as much as we saw before. He just is not quite the same player. And he has to play better if the Chargers want to reach the level of football that they want to get to.
Yeah, I mean, we all know how important it is to stop interior pressure, right? To stop the quarterbacks from being able to step up in the pocket and just getting to them quicker, because that fastest way to the quarterback is a straight line. He's the closest one to it. And
Yeah.
he's given that, a lot of that. Chris Jones took his lunch a few different times, right? And
Yeah, he did.
switched over from Zion Johnson to him in that game. Yeah, the concern, I mean, the screenplay was pretty alarming because he had a dude one-on-one and like didn't even look like he really tried to get
Yeah.
a hand on the dude. Like that is definitely a little concerning, but just overall him connecting at the second level is something that I think has been kind of derailing the Chargers rushing attack all year. I mean, I went back and watched it just to kind of see, if I was missing something on Matt Feiler, and he's not getting there. I mean, Trey McKitty, I also saw, has not been doing what you need him to do in the run blocking game either. Just
Yeah.
guys are not connecting, and missing on one guy at the second level is blowing up a lot of these rushing plays. But
Makes
Matt
all the
Feiler,
difference.
100%. I mean, you said, hey, 15 pressures already this season. If you times that by 4, which is still one less game than you need for a full regular season, that's 60 pressures as opposed to 24 or 25.
Ugh.
Like that's, you know, uh, crazy
That's Storm
difference,
Norton
a
levels.
crazy amount of variance there, and especially playing guard. Like you don't see guards usually give up the kind of pressures that tackles do going
No.
up against freakish edge rush and stuff like that. He only gave up one pressure in the last game. Didn't think he was particularly good, but it wasn't enough to derail the Chargers offense. They just put up their best offensive performance. So I think
Yeah.
he will come back to earth a little bit. I think it will regress to the mean and he won't be as bad. Will he get to the level he was in 2021? Maybe not. But I do think he can be much less bad than he's been to start the season in the first 4 games. Maybe there's an injury there that they haven't been publicizing or he hasn't been publicizing. He does look a little stiff, especially
That's
when
what I'm
trying
saying, man. It
to
seems that
hit
way.
moving targets for sure in the open field, especially. But we do
Yeah.
have a couple more voicemail or a couple more questions and a voicemail to get into. First, let's get into this from Chris Saiz, who asks, do you think that defensive struggles against the run of the players on defense or from the coaching staff? I think if you take away the 3 big runs in the last 3 games, we have a different conversation. I mean, that's all we've been talking about here is, in regards to the Chargers run defense. I mean, 3 straight games of giving up 50 plus yard runs. That just does not happen at all. And somehow the Chargers have let it happen to them in the last 3 consecutive weeks. And if you do take away those 3 runs, David, listen to this. So the Chargers have given up 439 rushing yards allowed, which is actually really middle of the pack. They haven't necessarily been dominated on the ground. Efficiency wise, though, they've given up 5.4 yards per carry. That's awful. Like
Yeah, it's bad.
that's about as bad as it gets, worse in the league type of bad. The 3 plays that we're talking about, they gave up 177 rushing yards on 3 rushes.
Whew.
If you take those away, right, which obviously they happened, that doesn't tell you much.
Can't exactly
But
do that.
outside of those 3 runs, the Chargers have given up 262 yards on 78 carries. That's an average of 3.35 yards per carry, which
That
would be
plays.
towards the top of the league as far as run efficiency wise. And it
Yeah.
has felt like the Chargers run defense has improved in a lot of ways. It's just these big plays. So it's like, how do you stop these explosive plays because everything else has actually been okay?
Yeah, I mean, they're 14th in rushing yards allowed. And they're only allowing 109.8 rushing yards per game, which, if you look at last year, they gave up 138.9 rushing yards per game. So there is an improvement there, and it is tangible.
Yeah.
You can see it. But that's taking the next step now, after they took this initial step, is eliminating those big rushing plays.
Yeah.
If they do that, then we are definitely having a much different conversation. And I think it is both. It's coaching and it's players. I mean, they work together on this. I mean, it looks like on a lot of those big rushing plays, like on the 4th down play, that they weren't even close against the Jacksonville Jaguars. That he went James Robinson went untouched on that play, and there wasn't anybody anywhere close. And so it seems like they definitely got washed out, but I don't know if they were in the right running play to be able to combat that type of run. But yeah, you get rid of that, and we're looking at a much different situation. But unfortunately, that's just not possible.
Yeah, I mean, on the James Robinson play, you basically had Kyle Van Noy, who's smaller for an edge rusher anyways.
Yeah.
Bryce Callahan and Nazir Adderley going up basically head-to-head with 3 tight ends, super heavy on that side. To me, it's more about every single run that we've seen so far has been to the perimeter. And a lot of this is about your secondary not being able to tackle, because I do think it's player execution, because you see the lane that's supposed to be being filled.
Yeah.
And there's just different things going wrong. In the last game with Dameon Pierce, Kenneth Murray goes underneath and tries to kind of undercut the run instead of taking a better angle Drew
Yeah.
Tranquil gets lost in the wash. Nazir Adderley misses a tackle in the open field. Derwin James gets blocked, and it's
Yep.
Pater. I mean, that's all it
Yeah.
was there. Chris Rump takes it, gets upfield way too quick and ends up totally taking himself out of the play. It is execution. The Chargers have the guys, and most of these, they're fitting the run nicely. In these these situations, when you have everything so planned out like that, you miss one lane, that lane could lead to a touchdown, right?
To
And
the end zone.
and
Yeah.
that's what it's been. But it has been better. It's just those explosive plays have to stop. And this is not a week where you anticipate them having a great performance against a rushing attack, because the Cleveland Browns, even with Jacoby Brissett, have been crazy so far.
Yeah, Kareem Hunt, definitely scary. Nick Chubb, even scarier. And they got both of them that the Chargers are going to have to contend with on Sunday.
Yeah, we do have a voicemail that I want to get into here quickly. So we have something kind of going along these same lines. Let's hear it out.
Going on, Locked On. Pumped for the W. Good to get things turned around. I was wondering your thoughts on Christian Covington playing on that big touchdown run that we gave up. I noticed he got completely turned around on that, and it's just like, man, like if the Hoku's in there, I don't know, just feels like he's earned that spot and somehow got it taken away from him for whatever reason. But just wondering your thoughts on that, and if you see an elevation from Brandon coming soon.
I mean, Braden Fayoko should still be on the Chargers roster. It didn't really make a lot of sense when they brought Christian Covington in. Are they going to release Christian Covington again to get Braden Fayoko back on the roster? I don't necessarily see it at this point. Are they going to bring up a seventh defensive tackle for a game day without any injuries? It's hard to say, but I do think, yes, Braden Fayoko helps. He was their best run defender pretty much the entire offseason, and it was confusing to see him go. And I mean, there's obviously snaps for him. It was confusing that they didn't use Tito last week and had Covington active instead of him when it had been the other way around. And then Brandon Staley said they saw specific things. They were going super heavy. Christian Covington isn't to blame on that Dameon Pierce play, though. I mean, he was going down the line of scrimmage. He was scraping down along it. But if you want your defensive tackle making that play when your edge defender is, 20 feet to the right of him, like, it's just, that's a really tough play for him to make.
Yeah.
Was one of the closer people to getting a hand on him. Don't necessarily blame him for that, but also there hasn't been a ton great from Christian Covington either.
No, I mean, even in the preseason and training camp, I mean, he was never really a guy that was making a lot of splash plays. I felt like Braden Fayoko was really one of the guys that was creating havoc regularly and, doing so in the preseason. But it came down to some roster gymnastics, them trying to kind of get around contract stuff, which I never like doing. I never like seeing that stuff. I really just feel like the best players should be on the team. But I mean, hey, it's part of the game. That's part of the NFL. But going up against these two runners that the Chargers are going to be going up against on Sunday, they really need to have the best run stoppers on the field, regardless of contract. It doesn't matter. You got to have the best guys on the team active. That includes Braden Fayoko.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he would definitely be a help. I think the thing with the Chargers is at least they haven't been getting blown off the line of scrimmage, which was a huge problem last season. I mean, there are times, right, where they are losing that line of scrimmage, but it's not as consistently just getting blown off the ball. I think they've been pretty good in most of their short yardage situations so far when they know the run is coming. Braden Fayoko should be on the roster. I think this is a week where it's like you could look back on it and be like, hey, who could have made a big difference there? Braden Fayoko. But we'll talk about that dangerous rushing attack from the Cleveland Browns tomorrow on Crossover Thursday, because we're going to be joined by the Locked On Browns podcast to hash out who's going to win this thing. It is a tough matchup for the Chargers stylistically, even with the 14th, most rushing yards allowed, 5.4 yards per carry, going up against a team who will be committed to running it 30 times. Is going to be a problem, and the Chargers have a big test ahead of them. But to make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe to the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and also follow the show for free on all platforms wherever you get your podcast from. Thank you guys so much again for making this your first listen. As always, if you need a second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On NFL podcast, or from the Peacock and Williamson, which is covering everything in the Locked On NFL world. Make sure you guys check up with them to make sure you're staying up to date with everything going on across the league. You can find that wherever you get your podcast from. And you can find this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever, anywhere, for free every day. And make sure you rate and review as well. You can also find the show on all of our social media. Thank you to everyone who reached out to us on Twitter, on our Twitter at LockedOnLAC, or in David Drogemeyer's DM at DroTalkSD. You can find me on Twitter at DanTalkSports. But you can also find us on our Locked On Chargers Facebook page and our at Locked On Chargers Instagram page. But make sure you guys are back here tomorrow for Crossover Thursday with the Locked On Browns podcast. Until then, take it easy and go Bolts.